in the horror genre. I'm your host, Nicole, and it's time to share another dark tale. Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome to another Women in Horror Month episode. I think this is maybe 5th or 6th annual. We've got many these days. We are continuing the Religion and Horror series with Silent Hill from 2006. And I'm joined this evening by good friend of the show and fellow woman in horror, Jacqueline from A Cut Above. Welcome back, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm so excited to be here. It's been far too long.
It really has. It really has. I was saying earlier, I always love being on Jacqueline's show, but I have to be, like the boys are there. And the boys are great. But Jacqueline and I, we don't ever get enough FaceTime, just one-on-one. So it's ladies' night. Tell the folks a little bit about A Cut Above.
So A Cut Above Horror Review is a weekly horror movie review show, and we get together every week and cover a different horror film. There's not much rhyme or reason to it. We rotate our selections and just kind of pick whatever we're feeling like at the time. And so we try to cover a wide variety of time periods of film. We try to cover different nationalities of film, different subgenres. We kind of try to get to everything, get a little bit of, the whole gamut. So, it's the three of us. It's myself and my dear friends, John and Hydraberg, and doing this podcast for almost 3 years now. We've, it's only strengthened our friendship, and it's something we all really love. So we all put our hearts into it, but it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
I really appreciate the themes that you guys come up with. Some of them are obvious, some of them not so much. My recent favorite was Browvember, in which you guys covered movies where people had a unibrow, and there were lots of movies in there I had never heard of or seen.
I had never heard of 2 of the 4 movies that month, and one of them I had seen, the other one I had not. That is an example of a joke that we took too far, but but it ended up having a pretty good result. So those were some of our funniest episodes. Hydraberg in particular was in fine form with his unibrow jokes. It all started with, a much earlier episode about prom night. And there's a character with a unibrow in that movie that just really seemed to enrage Hydraberg. It kind of turned into, well, let's do a whole month of movies with unibrows.
Yeah.
So Browvember.
I think those are probably great examples of movies that were more fun to talk about than probably to watch, which is like podcasting in its finest form, if you ask me.
That's partially true. There were, some of those movies that month were better than others, but a couple of them were like shockingly fun. So, I got to thank Browvember for making that happen, because I would have never watched them otherwise.
Yeah. And you guys are also doing a Women in Horror Month special on your show, right?
So we're not doing a single special. We're just kind of dedicating the whole month to it, because we do a show every week. So we have a different favorite female guest coming on each week. You are scheduled in there somewhere. I won't reveal for which episode yet, but of course the listeners don't know yet. But everybody should be on the lookout for that, because that's bound to be a good time. Of course, we always call you our honorary 4th member. You have guested on our show more times than anyone else by a mile.
Yeah, I feel so comfortable on y'all's show. I mean, it's always a good time. Y'all are so generous and like nice and so complimentary. So I always leave your show feeling very built up. And it's just always a good time.
I'm glad you feel that way. And it probably feels that way because we don't think of you as a guest. You're just one of us. So, you're just our friend.
So let's pivot away from Women in Horror Month just for a second and lean into the more religious aspect of the show. And if you don't mind sharing, what is your religious background?
So currently, I am what I and others would probably call an atheist. I'm pretty staunch in that at this point, but that was not always the case. I was raised in a, more or less like Christian setting. My parents were not extremely religious, but we went to church, sometimes a Methodist church for a time. I went to a private school, which was Christian in nature, but it was not, any particular denomination. And the school was pretty relaxed about it. It wasn't like a parochial school. There wasn't like daily religious teaching or anything like that. It was kind of like we said the Lord's Prayer every morning. There was chapel on Wednesdays, which was optional. So it wasn't, something that was like crammed down our throats. But unfortunately, one kind of impactful experience that I had in my youth was that I went to summer camp every summer, and it was a very intense kind of Southern Baptist summer camp.
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of methods of religious teaching there and the activities and stuff that we were supposed to do was really intense. And in my experience, quite negative. I found it to be like a very negative way of teaching. I felt like there was a lot of harsh judgments on the parts of like the camp directors and the counselors, and a lot of moralizing and a lot of shaming and things like that. And just overall, it really left a bad taste in my mouth. And as I got older and older, I would, I'd still continue to go to the camp, but I would start to question my counselors sometimes and want to ask them questions about like, this doesn't make sense. Why do you teach us this way? And what does this mean? I don't really understand. Just all sorts of searching type of questions that I think is typical for adolescents to go through. And those questions were really not received well or met with understanding and conversation and dialogue. It was more just kind of shut down and criticized and sort of judged. And it just didn't leave a good taste in my mouth. And so that kind of left me questioning through the rest of my adolescence and searching other avenues, and then deciding religion wasn't for me. And then later in adulthood, trying it one more time, like, well, this was my background. Maybe I was unfair. And, I started going to church again in my 20s. And then I will say something momentous did happen, which was that my father passed away about 13, almost 14 years ago. And I thought at the time, I was conscious that like this could be sort of a religious test for me, that like if ever there was a time that I would really want to grasp onto religion and really want to believe in it, it would be then. Because I would really want to believe in that existence of like a soul separate from the body, because I would want to believe that like my dad is in heaven now and he's still with me. And, and so God help me, I tried really hard to believe at that time. And I had to be honest with myself and admit that I could not. And so I thought, if that didn't do it, then I think it's not going to at this point in my life.
Was it at all like scary for you to let go of that, or did it come like pretty natural?
It wasn't scary to me because at that time I had already kind of thought, I think this is not going to happen in my life, or at least not at this stage in my life. Like, people go through lifelong journeys, and some people come to religion very late in life, and some people come and go with it and have like a complicated relationship with it. So I thought, at least at this point, I don't think this is for me. So I was already kind of there. And then when my dad passed away, I thought, well, here's a test. Can I believe it now? And unfortunately, the answer was no. But I thought it was important to be honest with myself and not try to force something that really wasn't ringing true for me.
Yeah.
And I don't say that as a judgment or criticism of others who do believe. It's just I am not there.
I think what you said about, trying to ask questions and it not being received well, that is something that for me is like a really big problem. in general, because even though I've always been a believer and I haven't really ever had to struggle with my personal faith, like there have been like facets of things that, it didn't make sense to me. And in many times I've been in a setting where I was kind of like, I just felt like a rock in somebody's shoe, and they would just like sort of breeze past my thoughts or my questions if it wasn't in the neat little box of, what we teach at church. And I think a lot of people probably have that experience, but I think that's a really big detriment, is not allowing people to have the space to explore. Because I always say, like, regardless of, how you may feel as a religious leader, like everyone has to be honest and be truthful. And if you can't be truthful with yourself, it's not real faith. Like if you just say, oh, I'm going to choose to believe this, but you don't really believe it, like that's not healthy and that's not good. That's not any way to grow a faith or a congregation, is, with people who are just talking themselves into it, who don't truly believe it. So that part of your story is something that I've heard from a lot of people and like really resonates with me. Have you ever seen the documentary Jesus Camp?
No, it's on my to watch list actually, but I have not watched it yet. I'm a little afraid to, because I'm worried that it's going to too closely echo my experience and like trigger something. But yeah, but it's on my queue.
I watched it when I was an older teenager or a very young adult. I can't remember which, but like, I was so triggered.
Oh gosh.
I became so frustrated with like some of these parents and stuff. And I was just like, oh, I'm so glad I made it out of that culture, but these poor kids. So hopefully they're all healthy adults now. But yes, just be warned that like you will probably feel some strong emotions. But thank you so much for sharing your story. Sure. You're the first.
Thank you for asking.
I believe you're the first atheist I've had on the show. So I was very interested to hear kind of like your story. And I've heard bits and pieces of it, but thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
So tonight we are talking about Silent Hill, and this is a little bit of a different women in horror movie for me, because I usually like to highlight female like creators, because we've had female characters, we've had, female actresses in horror for a very long time. But that's sort of, to me, the low-hanging fruit. Not that those people shouldn't be recognized, but I usually like to really focus more on creators. So this movie does not have female creators. However, it does have some really strong religious themes. And it has great female characters, great female cast. I think the themes are appropriate to women. And both, we've got the protagonist and the antagonist. It's like all women all the time. So I was like, I think this is a good one. There were some maybe more obvious ones. Like I had a few people recommend Saint Maud, which is a movie I really like. But I'm sort of Catholic to death right now after doing all the exorcism stuff. So yeah, so I was like, you know what? Like I need something a little different. So Silent Hill came to mind, and I was just like, yeah, this one's gonna be a lot of fun.
Honey, sometimes when you go to sleep, you go on a little walk, and sometimes you talk about a place.
I don't remember.
That's why we're gonna go there, so you can remember.
Sharon's gone. I need your help. I'm not okay. Please, hurry.
The fire started 30 years ago.
I don't know what's happening. Do you know what's going on here?
This place is completely cut off.
Only the dark one opens and closes the door to Silent Hill.
Where is she? I'm trying to find my wife.
She looks exactly like Sharon.
Why? Rose, come on! Rose, hurry! It's coming!
What's happening?
Oh!
To find your daughter, you must face the darkness of hell.
It's okay, baby. Mommy's coming.
Rose Da Silva and her husband Christopher are disturbed by their adopted daughter Sharon's constant sleepwalking and nightmares about Silent Hill, a town in West Virginia that was abandoned in the 1970s due to a massive coal seam fire. Desperate for a solution, Rose takes Sharon on a trip to Silent Hill to find answers. Her erratic behavior concerns police officer Sybil Bennett when they encounter her at a gas station en route. As they enter Silent Hill, a girl steps out into the road, causing Rose to crash her car and black out. She awakens in the fog-shrouded dimension of Silent Hill and realizes that Sharon is missing. Searching the town for Sharon, Rose pursues the girl she encountered prior to the crash, who resembles Sharon. At various points, the town suddenly transitions into a nightmarish world inhabited by inhuman monsters, including the fearsome Pyramid Head. Sybil encounters and tries to arrest Rose, but while attempting to bring her to the local station, they realize they are trapped, all roads out of town ending in a mysterious cliff. Rose encounters many other inhuman creatures and learns of Alessa Gillespie, a young girl burned as a witch by the Brethren, the town's fanatical cults. Her mother, Dahlia, wanders the streets as an outcast, guilt-ridden over her negligence that led to Alessa's suffering. In the real world, Christopher searches the abandoned town with policeman Thomas Gucci, but they find nothing. The town appears to them simply as a dilapidated, abandoned place, devoid of fog or creatures. Gucci later reveals he lived in Silent Hill and saved Alessa from the fire. He encourages Christopher to end his futile search. In the Silent Hill dimension, Rose encounters the girl again, revealed to be an aspect of Alessa. When the town transitions into the dark dimension, Rose, Sybil, and Anna, a Brethren member, flee to an old church, but Pyramid Head catches and flays Anna alive. Brethren members lead Rose and Sybil to a hospital, claiming the demon that has taken Sharon is in the basement. Upon noticing an image of Sharon in Rose's locket, Christabella, the high priestess of the Brethren, identifies Sharon as looking like Alessa. She decries the two women as witches and orders her brethren to stop them. Sybil holds them off while Rose descends into the basement, but is quickly subdued and captured. Rose explores the basement, but it is barricaded by a group of disfigured nurses. She sneaks past them and enters Alessa's room. In a flashback, it is revealed that Alessa was stigmatized by the townspeople for being born out of wedlock. Christabella immolated Alessa during a ritual in 1974, but Dahlia alerted Gucci. The pair arrived too late, and the ritual went awry, igniting the coal seam fire under the town. Hospitalized and in excruciating pain, Alessa's rage split her soul apart, one half manifesting as the dark entity responsible for the shifting dimensions of Silent Hill. Her remaining innocence manifested as Sharon, who was taken to the real world to be adopted. Desperate to find Sharon, Rose allows dark Alessa's spirit into her body, allowing it access to the church. Sharon, despite being protected by Dahlia, is captured by the Brethren. In the church, Christabella burns Sybil as a witch and plans to do the same to Sharon. Rose confronts Christabella, denouncing her as a murderer before Christabella stabs Rose in the heart. Alessa emerges from the blood flowing from the wound as a disfigured being bound to a hospital bed and tears Christabella and her followers apart with razor wire. Rose and Sharon leave the town and return home. Upon arriving, they discover they are still in the foggy dimension, separated from reality. Meanwhile, Christopher awakens alone in the real world and discovers that the front door has mysteriously opened. So, Jacqueline, this was your first watch. What was your initial reaction to this movie, and did you enjoy it?
Wow. So it was a lot. It was a lot to get my head around. It's a complex movie. There's a lot going on, and to be honest with you, I do feel like I need a few more watches to hopefully fully get my head around it. But I've spent a lot of time thinking about it and have, hopefully pieced together some coherent thoughts about it. Did I enjoy it? To be honest with you, the first hour I do think was kind of a slog. I think not a lot happened in the first hour. It was a lot of Rose kind of just running around the town looking for Sharon. But I feel like in the second half, that's where it really picked up and got so interesting, like so much more interesting in terms of symbolism and plot intricacies and just visual imagery. So I would say I struggled with the first half, but deeply enjoyed the second half. Does that count?
Yeah, definitely. Have you ever played the Silent Hill game before?
I have not. I'm completely new to the whole concept of this story. I'm not a gamer at all. I have no background knowledge of the video game. I had never seen the movie. So the whole thing was very new to me, like extremely fresh eyes for this watch.
Yeah, I've never played the game either. I've heard, I think still it's considered one of the scariest games ever made. I would love to play it, but I don't even know if I have the means to do so. I'm like, you can probably play almost any game on a laptop now, but like you have to have special programs. I don't know. Like if anybody out there knows how I could easily play Silent Hill, let me know.
I have a feeling that we have mutual friends who probably would know the answer to that.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. So before we get into the specifics of the movie, there are a couple of things I want to touch on. I want to talk about some of the real world stuff that inspired this story. And then I want to talk about the concept of purgatory and limbo. So first off, the abandoned town with the coal fire burning underneath it, that is based on a place called Centralia in Pennsylvania. Have you heard this story?
I never had until you mentioned it. So, before the show. So I had no idea there was any real world basis for any of this. I really thought it was just based on a video game. So
I know, because it doesn't seem real. It seems very supernatural. But yeah, so there is a city called Centralia. It was a mining town, and there was a fire in 1962. That's another thing too. It's like, it seems like this should have happened like a really long time ago. Like the 60s feels like kind of recent, but it was a mining town, and I believe like the 1800s. And I guess a lot of the mines like weren't even in operation anymore. And there is some conflicting ideas about how the fire even started. Like no one knows for sure how the fire started. But in 1962, they had organized, they were going to do a cleanup of the mines, and somehow it set on fire. And they're not sure if like they set it on fire intentionally and then it got out of control, or if it was like another factor. So that's mysterious. They're not sure exactly how it set on fire, but very quickly it became uncontrollable. And it got so bad that the government had to evacuate the town and be like, you can't live here anymore. And it's still burning underneath the town.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Like 60 years later?
Yes. And so it's still just this abandoned, I guess there are a few people like hangers on who still live there. But like, if you look up pictures of it, all of the roads into town are all like cracked and overgrown. And there are pockets of just like steam from the fire underneath. And there is one church there that still meets every Sunday. And it's a really cool looking church, and I'm sure had to be inspiration for the church in this story. But the whole thing is just It doesn't sound true, but it is.
No, it does not. That is wild.
Yeah.
I had no idea. Who is going to that church? Like just those few people, like on the edge of town, I guess. But like, how do you stay in a town like that without like services and resources to support it?
Yeah, I don't know. And like apparently
Wow.
it hasn't been like the church hasn't been affected. So yeah, maybe it is like on the outskirts, or maybe it's not near one of the like mine shafts or something. But yeah, it's a pretty wild story, and people will go there for like the dark tourism or like the urban explorer folks. They'll go there. There's another kind of famous picture of it where there's just graffiti all over one of the like main roads into town. So it's a pretty cool one. I mean, I would love to drop by someday if I'm ever in the area.
Road trip.
It gives me like a kind of like a Chernobyl vibe, you know, it's very similar to that, you know, that abandoned town type thing. Which, by the way, folks, I have talked about both Centralia and Silent Hill in one of my previous episodes, Meltdown. So if you have listened to that episode and you're like, this sounds familiar, that is why. The other real world place that I haven't heard that Silent Hill is directly connected to it, but there's a place in Kansas called Stoll Cemetery, and it is rumored to be a gateway to hell. And no one knows 100% why. It's widely regarded as like a hoax. Like I guess somebody wrote an article about it, and I think like a university newspaper. But again, somehow it like caught fire, and like it has like stuck in people's mind as this piece of folklore. And so it's become this pop culture thing where people just say that there's the entrance to hell is at Stoll Cemetery in Kansas, which I find pretty interesting.
I imagine that's probably a destination for dark tourism as well. People going to see like, am I going to see anything, you know, witchy or ghosty?
Oh yeah, I'm sure that Halloween is like lit at the Stoll Cemetery. And I guess I read too, I never watched Supernatural, but apparently there are a couple of episodes where like I guess they encounter the devil at Stoll Cemetery. So
yeah, so I didn't know that was like a famous locale, but now I need to get that on my radar, especially if I'm ever out in the Midwest.
Yeah. I'm like, you know, I live in Arkansas, so I'm close to Kansas, Missouri. So I understand that sometimes there's just not a lot else to do. So might as well go to the cemetery and craft a good story.
Yeah. What do people say happens there? Kind of, you know, creepy happenings.
Let me look up the specifics here. Let's see. The Stoll Cemetery has gained an ominous reputation due to urban legends involving Satan, the occult, and a purported gateway to hell. It is claimed that the devil appears in Stoll twice a year, once on Halloween and once on the spring equinox. People say the cemetery is location, one of the 7 gates of hell. And one of the nearby evangelical churches says that it's possessed by the devil.
Yeah, I looked it up earlier today. I was trying to find out more, and I saw these vague claims, but I never saw any kind of specific description of what people have actually seen there, or, you know, any occurrence that has actually happened. So it all seems a little vague.
I think that's why it is largely discredited. You're like, okay, if anybody's been to Stoll and you have seen the devil, please let us know.
Yes, because I would like to know that.
So the other cultural importance in this movie, the meat, if you will, is, of course, we've got hell, purgatory, limbo, this whole thing going on. Visually, of course, it's very hellish. When it switches from the beautiful foggy ash over to the rust and the decay, clearly, like, it's very hellish. It gives me a little bit of Hellraiser vibes. And I always just kind of assumed, I was like, oh, well, this is like, these folks are stuck in like purgatory, right? We all kind of like have a cultural context for what the word purgatory means.
Right.
And so in searching for this episode, there's purgatory and there's limbo, and they're different. I did not know.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I didn't know either. I'm about to learn, I guess.
Yes, now we know. Purgatory, by the way, these are both very Catholic. Protestants don't believe this, and that's one of the reasons why I was not familiar with it. Purgatory is a passing intermediate state after physical death for purifying or purging a soul. A common analogy is dross being removed from metal in a furnace. Limbo is the afterlife condition of those who die in original sin without being assigned to the hell of the damned. So basically, purgatory is like you've been forgiven of your original sin, so you've accepted Christ, but you have unforgiven sins. So you have to go to purgatory for a while and become purified from your earthly sins to then be worthy to go on to heaven. Limbo is where you go when you have not been forgiven of original sin, but you're not like evil enough to just be sent to hell. So there's this like sort of important distinction that I had never heard of before.
So then to clarify, am I to understand then that purgatory is temporary while limbo is eternal?
That is a great question. And I don't know that I have the answer, except, okay, so limbo, there's distinctions with limbo. So there's the limbo of the infants. So like, let's say
there's multiple limbos.
I know.
Oh,
so let's say that like your child dies and was not baptized. That's the limbo of the infants. And then there's another limbo. It's called the limbo of the fathers, which is where like if you died before Christ came, you went and hung out in limbo until Christ was crucified. And then he came down to limbo and like liberated you, right? Because if you died before Christ came, you haven't had a chance to accept Christ, which this is a thing I've heard debated in Protestant churches. Like, oh, well, what happened to people before Jesus was here? And no one knows, but everybody's got opinions. So that's the limbo of the infants and the limbo of the fathers. Now, I am not sure. I think limbo is also temporary. Because purgatory, you're purified, then you go to heaven. Limbo, I think, is the same. I think they're both like waiting rooms. Because I think if you're worthy of like the hell of the damned, you just go to the hell of the damned. So I think both of them are like in between places where you can become worthy of heaven.
Okay. Well, it gives me hope.
Yeah.
In case I'm wrong about this whole atheism thing.
You could totally go to limbo, Jacqueline. No.
Better than hell. I'll take it.
So the concept of this like in between or like waiting room, it's not just a Christian thing, I found. Judaism, Islam, Egyptian, and Greek mythology all have some version of this like in between or waiting place, which I find really interesting. I really like to see the things that are similar across religions because I think religion is just one of those like essential, like important things like to humanity for some reason. Like every culture, maybe not every, virtually every culture develops some kind of religion, and many of them have like many similarities. And so this is one of those things where like many religions that have far-flung beliefs, many of them have this concept of this sort of in-between place. Now, of course, in our like day-to-day culture, we use the word limbo and purgatory like, you know, when you're having like a bad day at work or a project isn't going well, you're like, I'm in purgatory or I'm in the ninth circle of hell, or we use it like very, very differently than what the real definitions like turn out to be. Right. So I have a question then, bearing in mind all of that. The cult in Silent Hill, the Brethren, do we think that they're in limbo or purgatory, or are they somewhere else? Where are these folks?
The way I'm starting to rethink a little bit just in light of your distinction between purgatory and limbo, but I'm trying to sort of mentally reevaluate and say, like, are my thoughts still true? Now that I know this, the way I interpreted what was going on with the cult, it seemed to me that they were in purgatory. And I'm going to try to like relate this back to what you said about the difference between them, because it seems like they're still trying to purify people and still trying to purify the group as a whole, like rid itself of, sinful members. Like they want to burn the witch, and they're still kind of casting judgment on other people. And so it feels like they're trying to purify themselves as a group, almost like they're waiting for, like they still think that there's a way for them to be saved, like, or get out of this world that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know. I would suggest purgatory. What are your thoughts?
Well, I kind of always thought purgatory, not knowing there was a distinction between purgatory and limbo. But according to these definitions, I feel like these people are not in either. Like, I feel like these people are, after Alessa comes after them in the end, I feel like these people are straight to jail, Like, I feel like these people are headed for hell. You know what I mean? Like, so, but again, like, I don't think this movie is working with the framework of the actual Catholic definitions of this. I do think there is a really interesting line that I really love. Love Rose. She's very strong. She's got some great lines. And there, at one point, she says, "You are alone in this limbo and God is not here." And I do feel like they have this idea that they are in some kind of system, that they are righteous and they are in some kind of system that it's clear that they are not in. Like, the rest of the world has moved on. They are stuck in this place of their own making. So I feel like conceptually it's purgatory, but like technically I don't think where they are has anything to do with God or forgiveness or redemption.
Yeah, well, so I guess, maybe I should clarify. Throughout the film, I thought that they were in like a purgatory, but then once Alessa like releases her vengeance, then I think it becomes a hellscape. And so, but leading up to that moment, I assumed it was a purgatory situation, and then somehow it like transitioned. I don't know how you transition from purgatory to hell, but
it's very like cyclical, right?
Yeah. And so, I mean, it just turns into this huge chamber of suffering, right? Mm-hmm. And so that to me, like, shifted it into hell. But I didn't look back and think that they had been in hell all along. But that was my interpretation of it.
Another question, and this doesn't really matter. I'm just curious. How long do you think it is between the cycles of like the fog and the decay? I've never wondered that until this viewing. And I was like, I wonder how long it is.
Well, maybe I misunderstood the film, but I didn't think that there was like a scheduled cycle, in a sense. I sort of thought it was like something that Dark Alessa willed to happen.
Maybe so.
Like, at her will. Is that wrong?
I don't know. Here's the deal. I think there's a lot of questions in this movie, and we don't necessarily have all the answers. So I'm here for all the theories. Because I always assumed that, it was like a set cycle. Like, it was every hour, every 2 hours, every 6 hours. But there's not necessarily any evidence for that. So you might be right. It might be random, which is scarier because then you can't really plan, Yeah,
so it felt unpredictable to me as it happened throughout the narrative of the movie. It felt unpredictable. And so I thought that this was like, at an emotionally tense moment, or, something that harkened back to what happened to Alessa. I thought it was like something that she was willing to happen. I felt like she was in control of that cycle. Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. It makes sense that she would be, because she's pretty much in control of all of it. And I mean, even they describe it as like her nightmare. So I wonder if it's even to some extent like subconscious, Like this is just part of like what lives in her brain.
Yeah, so my caveat for this whole episode is going to be that having only watched this once, I have my impressions, but that could change were I to view it, 2 or 3 more times. But these are my impressions after one watch.
Yeah, which I appreciate like the freshness of it because I saw this movie when it first came out and I've seen it probably half a dozen times. And I've grown to like love it more over time. Like I think because I've become so comfortable with it. So I've been doing a lot of talking and a lot of leading. What do you want to talk about next?
What do I want to talk about next? Oh gosh, there's so many things. I would really love to jump into the topic of motherhood and the themes of motherhood that are portrayed here because I think there are some interesting things happening.
Yes, and we're doing double duty on this episode. We've got the women, we got the religion, we're doing both. So motherhood, let's do it.
Yeah. So I think obviously this film has a lot of mother and daughter relationships in it, and some of them are not always clear in the sense that like Sharon and Alessa's identities are not always totally clear. But one thing I have to say that really stood out to me personally that I kind of latched onto is this idea of Rose's motherhood being held as so, like her role as a mother being so strong. She's very giving. The whole movie is her quest to do whatever she has to do to get her child back. I mean, she will literally do anything. She will literally like venture into hell, right? To bring her child back. This is just on a personal note for me. I appreciate any portrayal of an adopted child being deeply loved by a family and the mother in that relationship being portrayed as a genuine mother because I myself was adopted and I dislike portrayals of adoptive parents as not being real parents or like adopted children as not being real children, that like they're thought of differently in the family or like don't receive as much love, or that adoptive parents are not as important, or I don't like when people say like, oh, who's your real mother? Like I don't like those kinds of like concepts. And so I really appreciated the portrayal of Rose as a strong, dedicated mother and just as much a mother to Sharon as Dahlia is to Alessa and or Sharon. Like that's sort of unclear too. And so that kind of leads to something you had on your outline, which was, or maybe you didn't, but something that I read from the director was that he says this film is very much about like immaculate conception. And I think that there's like 2 ways that that's portrayed here. On the one hand, I think maybe what it's more explicitly referring to is Alessa's birth. I think it's suggested that perhaps Dahlia gave birth to her from like an immaculate conception. There's a big question mark about Alessa's father. And so, I feel like everything in this movie is a question mark, but I think it's possible. I think it's suggested that she could not have a father, or at least not like a human father, that, she was born immaculately to Dahlia. I think it's also possible that maybe just Dahlia's mother didn't want to be shamed because she was unmarried and, this is a judgmental crowd that she's part of. And so, that it could be that too, but I do think that there's a strong suggestion that this could be an immaculate conception. But I also think, and this may have been unintentional, but as an adopted child, I'm always sort of clued into this. I mean, you could also, in a sense, argue that the immaculate conception concept applies to Rose as well, because she is, this is a child that she did not give birth to. This is not like a traditional, like a biological, man and woman creating a child together. It's not exactly an immaculate conception, but this is, a child who was not born to these 2 parents that she lives with. And so I really appreciate that strong portrayal of motherhood and Rose as a very like self-sacrificing figure which I think has some of its own kind of religious implications, but maybe we'll hold off on that, I guess, for the moment. But yeah, so that's something I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I love Rose's character. She's so great in like many ways. And I love when she says to Sybil, she says, Sharon's adopted, but I'm her mother. And it's like the way she delivers that line, she's like got her hands on her hips and she's just very like sure of herself. And then I also love, we hear it twice, the mother is God in the eyes of a child. Like, I just think that's such a beautiful phrase. And I also really like how at the end of the movie, when Dahlia doesn't understand and she's like, why didn't she take me with the others? And whenever Rose quotes it to her, mother is God in the eyes of a child, thinking about this from a religious perspective, which is not something I've really done before. This is me really reading into this. But I thought, our parents make a lot of mistakes. Like nobody's perfect. Parents are just people and they're going to make mistakes. And growing up in a religious family as I did, I think about there are lots of things that I experienced in the church that like weren't good and weren't healthy and that I don't appreciate, but I've never blamed my parents for any of that stuff. Partly because as I got older, they have a lot of the same criticisms I do. So they weren't trying to sugarcoat stuff. They were always pretty honest. So that's part of it. But I think another part of it is that maybe Alessa even though she died as a child, I don't know if she's like mature enough to understand that like her mother was also a victim. It's like your mother's actions did lead to this end, but she was manipulated. She was also a victim. So I do think that there's something really pure about the fact that Alessa does spare her mother and this concept of mother is God in the eyes of a child. Like the whole relationship is really beautiful. And also to piggyback off what you said, Sybil is another great character who also has very motherly qualities. They talk about how she rescued that kid who was like thrown down the mine. Like she clearly also, like Rose, is very driven to protect and to, and to like rescue and to be like a guard against this larger, darker world. So all of those, Dahlia, Rose, and Sybil, all are just so interesting to me. And they all are kind of like strong in their own ways. So yeah, definitely motherhood is a big, big deal in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more. Like those are the three central adult roles in this movie, and they're all protectors. They're all nurturers in their own way. Absolutely. Well, and something I wanted to mention, you brought this up before we were recording, but you mentioned something about the significance of names. And, despite the kind of religious upbringing that I had, I'm surprisingly not that knowledgeable about a lot of details in the Bible. So I don't always pick up on references and things, but one thing I did pick up on, it's not a biblical reference, it's a literary reference. I don't know if you picked up on this too, but the names of Rose and Sharon, to me, go together. So Rose of Sharon is a name, like it can be a girl's name, and it can also be the name of a flower. But I put those names together in my brain immediately because it reminded me of The Grapes of Wrath. I don't know if you've read that novel. And so again, I don't know how deliberate these choices are and whether it's like designed to be a reference to this, but this is what happened in my brain. I immediately thought of a character in The Grapes of Wrath named Rose of Sharon. And her character in the film goes through a lot, but kind of in her most fully realized self, in her, as after she sort of undergoes the majority of her character arc, she becomes a mother. She's pregnant. Well, she's pregnant and her husband leaves her, and then her baby is stillborn, which is, it shakes her to her core. It's tragic and devastating. And of course, it's a profound loss. But then the last scene of the novel, like the very last page, there's like an elderly man who's starving and weak and sickly and, in desperate need of help. And she has, just had a stillborn baby, but she's still producing milk. And she literally feeds this dying man from her breast in an effort to save him. And so I think that is like a reflection of that specific character in that specific novel is a reflection of motherhood, is like obviously a nurturer, but also like one who sacrifices for not just her own, but for for others. And so to me, that was a connection to Rose and Sharon in this film. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that Rose of Sharon can also be like a reference to Mother Mary, Mary, the Virgin Mary. I don't know if you are aware of that, but I did read some brief mention of that. I couldn't find a lot to substantiate that. So I thought maybe you would know better than I.
So it is in the Bible. I'm not aware of a specific reference to Mary by that name, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So I looked up kind of all of the main characters' names because same thing, like Rose of Sharon, I was like, that sounds familiar. So Rose of Sharon, it says her name in Hebrew means a flower of the field. In the Song of Solomon 2:1, there's this verse that says, I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys. So it's this idea of, something beautiful growing out of sort of something desolate. So there's that. Okay, let me run down this really quick. Okay, so Rose, the name Rose, like it just means the flower rose. However, roses are a symbol of love, beauty, and hope, which I think is appropriate. The name Sharon, just on its own, means fertile plain. In the Bible, Sharon refers to flat land at the foot of Mount Carmel. And then when you put Rose of Sharon together, that's how you get a flower in the field. So Rose and Sharon are definitely like working together, like biblically. The name Sybil means prophetess, which I don't know if there's a direct tie in this movie, but prophetess sounds strong and Sybil is strong. So I feel like, when I read that, I was just like, ooh, yeah, that seems right, The name Alessa is a shortened form of Alessandra, and it means defender of the people. And I was like, the fact that she ends up, taking revenge on these folks for mistreating people, I'm like, that's resonating. The name Dahlia means valley, which is interesting because Sharon means fertile plain. So again, we've got these like there's a little bit of a resonance there. And then also Dahlia, like very clearly, she's like a downtrodden woman. So the fact that it means valley makes sense to me. And then of course, also you've got Rose as a flower and Dahlia as a flower. So that's a neat little connection.
They do seem all sort of tied together in a way.
Yeah, it's not like a, ABC. The dots aren't perfectly connected, but there's a lot of interesting like stuff going on. And then Christabella just simply means like believer, which is right on the nose. So
she certainly is.
Yeah. So that was just a fun little rabbit trail to go down. It's again one of those things I didn't really think about it the first few times I watched it, but watching it this time, I was like, oh, these names, we got flower names, we got biblical names. Like, I was like, there has to be some like stuff going on here for sure.
Yeah, I feel like those had to be deliberate choices for specific reasons, because those just aren't like the most common names nowadays. How many little girls do you meet named Sharon or Sybil?
Yeah.
Or Dahlia? Like any of these, really, they're all sort of slightly unusual. They're not, totally off the wall, but I mean, they're not the most common names. It's not like, most of the female characters that you're going to see in mid 2000s movies on a daily basis.
Exactly. You're right. They're just a tiny bit different than the norm, but not so far off that you would think about it right off the bat, which is sneaky, and I like it.
Right. Yeah. It's like if there was a character named Marge, like people just aren't named that anymore.
No, not so much.
There would have had to be a reason.
So let's talk a little bit about like the cults and the witchcraft, because with everything going on in this movie, it's also a witchy movie sort of randomly. I don't know. I feel like it fits perfectly. So you said you liked the second half of this movie better than the first half. I am glad though that like we don't know about the cults and the cursing people as a witch and all of that until later. Like I feel like the mystery in the beginning, and then when we get to understand why later. I appreciate all of that because I feel like I'm bought into the story and I'm bought into the characters, so that I'm a little bit more willing to like go along with, because it gets real sort of bombastic when we figure out who these people are and what they're doing, and we're burning witches like left and right.
Yeah, it gets real, hellfire and brimstone pretty fast.
Yeah. Yeah, it like sort of turns into like a 16th century like witch hunt classic,
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because that part of it really is sort of kept hidden until quite late in the film. Up until then, it really seems like it's kind of a standard supernatural type situation with like shifting dimensions, but it's not immediately obvious that there's a religious element to it. Like we have little hints along the way. At the beginning of the film, we see the, the sign with the Bible quote on it leading into town, and, a couple things sprinkled throughout, but it's not explicit. It's not so explicit until quite late. And so, and you don't realize that is there and that it has that degree of importance in the history that has brought us to this point.
And I guess too that like this, it seems like this cult is like pretty secretive and that they literally run everything, but it's all sort of behind closed doors. And that's why like they have the doorway to like the sacrificial room is behind the painting in the hotel, and they're all wearing like hoods. All that imagery, by the way, so great. All the church,
amazing, the
church symbol and like the design of the church and all that stuff was like real great. But I guess so it's kind of like culty secret society. Like it's just different than, what I expected, what I thought. Like you said, it seemed like just a more standard supernatural, this place is cursed, we don't know why. But I personally appreciated the cult turn. I bought into it.
Yeah, me too. I love stories about that sort of thing. And I felt that the movie was criticizing the fanaticism of this cult, but I did not feel like the film was anti-religious in any way.
No.
There's some movies that I think sort of blur that line and sort of condemn religion in general because of certain fanatical factions, but I actually felt like this movie wasn't doing that at all. I thought it was a clear distinction between the two.
I agree.
And I would also argue that, the film is sort of holding motherhood up as, godly. If it's coming off of that quote that you said, which I agree it's so touching and so beautiful that quote about motherhood is God in the eyes of child, or mothers are God in the eyes of child. That went straight into my heart.
Also, what you were saying about this is a very small thing, but the movie not necessarily criticizing all religion, is Rose is wearing a crucifix necklace. And it's just a small thing, but they do show it a couple times. And there's one point, it's when she's stuck in the bathroom and the like miners are like beating on the door. She's like holding it and she's praying. And I can't remember if she prays at another time in the movie, but it's just a tiny little thing. But I was like, oh, like she believes in something, And I think it's a subtle, but again, like important contrast between what she's doing and what's important to her and what she's fighting for versus these other folks.
Well, and I think it actually kind of goes back to what you were saying at the very beginning of the show before we even started talking about the film. But when I was talking about my religious experiences in my youth, and you said, when religious people aren't willing to hear questions or, can't, withstand any kind of opposition or resistance, and you just want to force people into like don't ask questions, just believe this, then that's not really faith. That's not a way to grow your faith. That's more like dogma. And so I think that this film itself is drawing that distinction. Rose seems to actually have faith. But what this cult is doing is dogmatic. And so I think that the film actually illustrates that distinction that you drew yourself early on the show.
Yeah. And another interesting woman in this movie is Christabella, who is the leader of the cult, which, again, in and of itself, so often we see leader of a cult, it's going to be a man. Not this one. It's Christabella. And she herself is kind of motherly in some ways. She's sort of like, taking care of all her little chickens, and like gathering them into the church. Yes, her little flock. And she's also like pretty kind at first, like pretty tolerant of bringing people in. And she's like, well, I don't think you should go to the hospital, but if that's what you want to do, we'll take you there and like tell you where to go, where you need to be. Like she seems very kind of like, she seems a little cold, but at the same time, she's sort of like, you know what, live and let live. I don't think this is a good idea, but like live your life. And then we have that like brutal turn when she sees that Sharon looks like Alessa. And then they like beat Sybil almost to death. Honestly, it seems like she's dead. And then we find out later, like, oh no, she shall be burned.
She's just like tied up to a stick, getting ready to, roast herself.
I know, man, what a disappointing death. But also like what a noble death, Like, it's frustrating, but also like, Sybil, man, she's great.
That was a loss.
Yeah.
She was done dirty.
Speaking of, okay, again, this movie, I think just like the art direction and the production design is gorgeous. And so when we first meet Sybil and she's on her motorcycle and she's got that tight cop uniform on, when she pulls that helmet off and she's got a blonde pixie cut, I was like, oh, this woman she's strong. She's amazing. And I had never seen Laurie Holden in anything. That was the first thing I ever saw her in. And so I was just like, who is this person? I was like, she's awesome.
Oh my gosh. That was such a great moment. I marked that too. Like that, like I definitely clocked that moment. I was like, whoa. Yeah, that's a powerful kind of reveal. Super hot, I gotta say.
Seconded. Yes, definitely. And then my second favorite look is when Rose comes back from the hospital and she's like covered in dirt and stuff, but her hair is like slicked back. Her sweater's gone at this point. So you can like see her arms, like she's got on a sleeveless top and she's just, she's looking so strong.
It's fierce.
Yes, it's exactly. It's fierce. It's fierce. So that's a little off topic, but like I couldn't not mention.
Yeah, no, I think that matters. I think that like costuming and makeup and hair design, I think all those things matter because they create the character, to an extent. I mean, obviously the actor does most of the heavy lifting and the writing does a lot, but like the character doesn't work if the character doesn't look right. So I don't discount those things at all. That's not, trivial.
Yeah, 100%. Another really great look. I mean, like all the monsters are terrifying. But like the nurses, oh my gosh.
Horrifying. Horrifying.
Yeah. And the fact that
so
they're like
disturbing.
Drawn to the light. Oh.
There's something about that seems so inhuman. It seems more like insect-like. Their features are not normal. They're drawn to the light. They sort of scurry a little bit. And including, okay, here's something I needed to ask you. That one nurse later in the movie who's like weeping and you don't really see her face at first. What is going on there? Who is that? I thought they were saying that was Alessa and I was very confused.
No, I think it's just the nurse. I think it's just the nurse that was in Alessa's room, like taking care of her.
Okay, because I thought somebody gestured to her at some point and said that was her.
No, because she mentioned something about hurting somebody who was only curious, and then it shows that little clip of her nurse like peeking in. So I guess whenever Alessa's like nightmare took over, I think she was just like collateral damage because she was in the room with Alessa. And so now I think she's just sort of like doomed to stay there and take care of her.
Okay. That helps because that was adding an extra layer of confusion for me because I thought, well, is there another version of Alessa? Is there like a future version where she's older? I don't know. I didn't know what was going on. So I'm glad that it's not her at all.
No, I think it's just a random character. I think it's probably purely for another cool visual. Yeah. Okay, so speaking of Alessa, we've got Alessa in the hospital, the real Alessa who's been burned. And then we've got Sharon, who were explained that it's like the good part of Alessa. I don't know the mechanics of how that came to be a human baby. I don't need to know the mechanics of that. But
well, you see, Nicole, a man and a woman. I'm just kidding.
Because then we also have like Dark Alessa as a child is like the devil, basically, I'm going to say. Because you got Alessa in the bed is real Alessa. Sharon is something else. And then there's this Dark Alessa who weasels her way onto Rose's good side and gets taken into the church, which is what we want because these people deserve just judgment. But I do not trust this little Dark Alessa devil figure. And at some point, when literally all hell is breaking loose and there's razor wire and chunks of people and blood and gore, Rose and Sharon are like huddled in the corner, and Rose has her hand over Sharon's eyes, and Sharon like sees Dark Alessa like through her mother's, like in between her mother's fingers. And there's this moment where she like, and then I read somewhere that meant that like Dark Alessa and Sharon remerged. And I was like, I did not read it as that. I thought she was just scared of this figure. Like, did you have any thoughts about that?
It didn't seem to me like they merged. I did not see that. I guess I can see how somebody would read into that. But even if they didn't, to me, it sort of begs the question that, like, you know, if a human soul is like ripped in two and one side is the, you know, all the dark side of human nature that kind of is allowed to flourish and grow, and the other side is the innocent part without that darkness, it kind of makes me wonder then, you know, once they get out of that situation and, you know, the cult has been destroyed and everything, and Sharon and Rose leave, it sort of makes me ask the question, like, is Sharon really like a complete person? Is she like a full human? And I don't mean that in like, is she a monster? I just mean like, if you only have half of a soul and if you don't have the dark side of human nature that we all have, then are you like fully human? So I was sort of concerned about that.
Okay. That's so sweet. I'm concerned about Sharon.
I'm concerned about Sharon. We need to talk about Sharon.
Oh, because like I assume that like Alessa, real Alessa, like her soul will be like free to go wherever, and little devil Dark Alessa will just go back to hell or wherever the devil lives. And then Sharon will just live as a regular person. Which none of this really matters, right? Like when we start talking about these little like the minutia of how it all works, I think it all sort of falls apart. And it's like so
speculative.
Yes, like the mystery is, I think, part of the appeal of many supernatural movies. Not when it leaves you with big plot holes, but in this case, we don't need to know all the like little mechanics.
Right. It doesn't really matter, but it's fun to wonder, though.
Yes, and like perhaps, mayhap, Jacqueline, that is why Sharon and Rose are kind of stuck in this in-between world.
That's true, but then it also begs the question, well, if she's not like a fully realized human now, then she never was.
But the
Sharon.
Other half of her soul was still out there. And I would like to believe that after the razor wire revenge, that like original Alessa has moved on somewhere else. Like she doesn't still exist in Silent Hill. Does she still exist in Silent Hill? I don't know. But
I mean, what about Dark Alessa? Like, does she not still exist?
Well, I mean, that's the thing is I think that the child we see as Dark Alessa, I think is like a demon or the devil. Mm-hmm. Because the person in the bed is Alessa. So I would assume that like that is what was left of her once the good part of her went to live in Sharon. See how this
Yeah. Look at this path we're going down right now.
We're just pulling at the thread and it's all coming apart.
Yeah. So I guess I thought that real Alessa in the bed, that's her name. Mm-hmm. Alessa in the bed is kind of like a husk at this point. I thought that like her entire soul had kind of left her body and then ripped into two. And so I didn't think that Alessa in the bed still really had a soul. I thought her soul was still kind of outside of her body.
But wait, though, because Dark Alessa, as she's presented to us in the movie, does not speak in the first person. She's like, Alessa this, Alessa that, Alessa was hurt, and then I came to her.
Yeah.
I came to her and I told her that I would make her darkest nightmare come true. And then they touch hands, and that's when the whole town turns dark. So to me, the child we see as Dark Alessa is like the devil. And Alessa still is like a person. Yeah, she's still like, it's complicated, Jacqueline.
It is. Yeah, it is. I see your point now. I guess I was just kind of going by that piece of narration that like, oh, when, her soul split. There's like a piece of narration that explains like how the soul kind of ripped in two. But you're right. And there's also, I think, a moment where Christabella says like the face of the demon hides behind an innocent or something like that, which is saying like it may look innocent, but it's really the devil.
Yeah.
So
which coming from Christabella is like, you probably call
maybe not reliable
the demon, right? Yeah. I think we don't necessarily trust Christabella 100%, but in this case, I think she might be right.
Right. Yeah. So that would corroborate what you said.
And, going by just like lore, demons, the devil can't enter a church, right? Because it's holy ground. So I would think that would be further support that Dark Alessa is an entity and not just half of Alessa's soul.
Yeah, and then maybe all that rage and pain that she went through. Like, I do think that the monsters that we see, like the deformed creatures and weird, like Pyramid Head and all that, I do feel like those were suggested to be like manifestations of her rage and pain. So maybe that's where that energy went to. If it wasn't, Dark Alessa, if Dark Alessa was just purely the demon or the devil himself.
Yeah.
Then maybe that's where all that energy went into those other creatures. And they were pretty much vanquished, right?
I mean, I would assume so because, we don't know the 100% the mechanics, but it's the way they set it up. Whenever Dark Alessa is giving the flashback speech, she's like, this like dream of a life has to end. And so to me, that means this back and forth, foggy / hellscape, that's all going to come to an end. So I assume that whenever Alessa vanquishes the cult, it's the whole world is changing. Now we know that the fog persists, but I assume that all the darkness is going to be gone, and that includes all the monsters,
right? All
that stuff. And we're only left with like the calm and the peace, even though it's not the real world. Everything's not right. Everything's not perfect, but all of that, like, darkness and evil and corruption is basically gone.
Mm-hmm. Well, that you brought up an interesting point a few minutes ago about how when they return home, they're still in the fog world. Mm-hmm. They're not in the real world. Mm-hmm. And like, that is very interesting to me that all of our primary characters are female and they are the only ones who seem to be able to enter the fog world. I can't remember the character's name, but Sean Bean. He's just Sean Bean to me. He tries to go find them, but he is not he doesn't even know about the existence of this fog world, and he certainly doesn't have any way to enter it. And so the fact that at the end of the movie he's still in the real world, and Rose and Sharon are still in the fog world is intriguing and mysterious to me. And it almost makes me wonder if the film is saying something about what we think is the real world. Because his, like at the end, he's waiting for them to come home, and there's very warm tones to the lighting. And I think there's maybe like a potted flower on the table, and he's like relaxing on the couch waiting for them to come home. It looks like actually quite cheerful. And by contrast, the world that Rose and Sharon are in is very cold lighting, colors, and has that fogginess to it. And I almost wonder if like that world is really meant, like it's suggesting that the world that they inhabit now is more real than his world. Like he's not able to see he's not able to see the full reality of what has led to this point.
Yeah, that's
Does that make any sense? Like he's not aware of the full reality. It's almost like he's living in like a little dream, like a little happy dream that isn't the full picture.
Well, what's interesting about that theory is that all along, I mean, he of course seems concerned for his daughter as well, but Rose is the one that's like obsessed with figuring out what's wrong with our child. So I think that's an interesting idea about the reality of what we're facing here, where he is living in kind of one reality and she's living in a different one. And I also like how they sort of like gradually integrate the difference, because at least for me, tell me if you had a different thought, but like I didn't notice right away, like, yeah, the lighting differences and stuff. And then at some point it becomes very clear that like, oh, well, he's there and she's there and they don't see each other and it doesn't look the same. Like, so I appreciate how we gradually realize that, oh, she is somewhere else.
Yep. Yeah, it took me a minute too. That was not immediately apparent, but you're right. At a certain point, it's crystal clear. But at first I was like, oh, when are they going to see each other? Yay.
Yeah.
They're going to be reunited. And I was like waiting for that happy reunion. And then it started to dawn on me that was not going to happen, which is, that was a good like illusion at first. They got me.
Did you like that ending?
Yeah, I did. It didn't have the like happy emotional satisfaction that I had hoped for, but I think it's more interesting. I think this ending is more interesting. It makes me ask more questions. And so this movie seems to be all about creating questions without necessarily feeling the need to provide all the answers. And so this is one of them. Like, I feel like the filmmakers are letting us speculate and consider different explanations. I think that like that's part of the intent here, is to deliberately either withhold answers or allow there to be no answers. You know what I mean? And so I think it's fitting.
Yeah. Of course, I love it when movies do that. As long as we don't have any gaping plot holes, I love a good, open-ended movie with lots of questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like we've covered almost everything. But before we give like final thoughts, is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we have not addressed yet?
Let me just consult my notes here.
Just comb through those notes. Oh, while you're looking through your notes, there is one thing I wanted to mention. Watching it this time around, it struck me that similar to, spoiler for Autopsy of Jane Doe. Have you seen that movie?
Yes.
Okay. So, folks, if you haven't, please skip ahead like a minute. Similar to Autopsy of Jane Doe, like these folks, like sort of like accidentally created a witch, through their religious practice and their own actions, they turned this like regular person into the thing that they feared the most. And I was like, oh, what a nice little bridge.
Nice little irony there.
Yeah. That's it for me. What about you? Anything else?
No, I think we got all the big stuff. Yeah.
All right. Jacqueline, give us your final thoughts, your bottom line on Silent Hill.
I think this is an interesting movie that brings together some nice themes that I think aren't always placed together this explicitly and explored in so much depth, namely the role of motherhood and religion as it fits into horror. And so putting those two things together so strongly in a horror film was very interesting. This film is very much a puzzle box to me. I hope that upon further viewings in the future, I will feel a little more confident in my grasp of it. But for my first time, I feel like I got, a lot out of it. I think one of the greatest strengths of this movie is its winding mysteries. And I think its second greatest strength is the absolute incredible visual imagery. And I don't think that that's unimportant. I think it matters here. I think the visual imagery and the production design on this are extremely important, like particularly important in this movie. It's important on every movie, but for this one, I think it's particularly important because I think we really have to buy the worlds that we inhabit in this movie as what they are supposed to be. Like they cannot fall down on the look of the fog world. They cannot fall down on the look of the nightmare world. They cannot fall down on the look of the monstrous creatures that we meet along the way. All of those things matter a great deal. And if they did not work, I think it would make the whole film not work, actually, because we really have to believe that these are like alternate worlds that we're inhabiting and following these characters through. And so luckily, I think all of those things are an absolute home run. Some of those images of the nightmare world, and particularly for me, the climactic scene where I almost just said Bellatrix, like I'm in Harry Potter, Christabella, and the other cult members get their just desserts. I mean, that is as indelible a hellscape as I've ever seen, probably.
It's brutal
in a horror film. But they nailed it. So there's so many interesting things going on in here. I do think there are times when the dialogue gets a little cheesy, but I mean, we might chalk that up to it being 2006. I feel like some of that was sort of typical of some of the films at the time. But Radha Mitchell, my God, what a performance by her. And Laurie Holden, those two characters really sort of carried the whole thing for me. I mean, they were really stellar. And so I think, I mentioned before that I felt like the first hour was kind of a slog. It feels a lot like just kind of watching Rose run around this town and, making some observations, but really very little to move the story forward. So that's a little rough for me. I feel like maybe some editing could have like tightened the pace just a little. I'm okay with like settling into a place and taking time to explore it, but I do think it kind of was a little excessive here. But overall, I mean, this was, I think, a successful and very thought-provoking exploration of motherhood and religion and what happens to an individual who goes through absolutely intense, unthinkable, unspeakable pain. I think that's like what it's about. What about you?
I feel, I agree with a lot of your points. I really appreciate this movie. Like I said, I've seen it many times, and I know I was definitely more critical of it, like when I first saw it. And over the years, it's become, I don't know if it's become a full-blown comfort horror, but it is something that like I can just put on at any time. And I think the atmosphere and the characters that you were speaking to, I think that's part of the reason why I can do that. I enjoy just kind of like the understated dread and the atmosphere of this movie so much. And I don't know how much of this story was included in the game, but I think this story works really well. Especially if none of this was in the game and they just hung this story on the visual of the game, then like kudos. But I do appreciate that they give it time to breathe and really develop characters that you care about. From a religious perspective, like The Mist, I think this movie gives us like a really worthy religious cult. We don't see a ton of them, and we don't get into like the little minutia of like their beliefs and their practices, but we get enough to understand it. And of course, like as is typical with these groups, like they're hypocrites. They use their power to manipulate and control and kind of punish, the weak and the innocent. That's nothing new, but it's executed really well here. And their punishment is very satisfying. Difficult to watch still, I think. Difficult to watch, but very satisfying. And I think it's especially because it's directly tied to their own actions. They're the ones that caused the fire. They are responsible for destroying the town. everyone else has been able to move on, but they are literally trapped in a hell of their own making. And that's a concept that I am always super fascinated with. And as we touched on already, I am a big fan of the end of this movie. It's really haunting that Rose and Sharon escape Silent Hill, but they don't completely escape the world of Silent Hill. And like, it's a little bit sad. Like, it's a little bit sad, but it's also an appropriate ending. And sometimes I feel like cheated when a horror movie gives us too much of a happy ending. So what I really like about this movie is that it gave us like a cathartic resolution, and Rose and Sharon get to be together, but it ultimately concludes on this kind of like beautiful, like melancholy note. Mm-hmm. And I love it when a horror movie sticks the ending, because it does not happen a lot of times. A lot of horror movies have terrible endings. And to me, this is a perfect horror ending. So I really appreciate that about it.
It is melancholy. You're right. And for me, it's so funny that you said that for you, this is kind of like a comfort horror movie, because to me, it penetrates my heart so much that for me, that makes it something I could not just throw on for fun. Like, I'd have to be in the right mood and be like, okay, here we go. Like, there are movies I'll just throw on, but I don't know, the sort of sadness of it makes it not that for me.
I don't know. I guess sometimes, well, a lot of times actually, like, sad, depressing things are what make me feel comforted, which a lot of horror fans would say that, you know. But yeah, a lot of times when I want to just throw something on, oftentimes it is something that's a little more somber and quiet. So this movie is good for that, for sure.
It's interesting.
So if people like Silent Hill, do you have recommendations for similar media, films, books, what have you?
I do. I have some choices here. I couldn't really think of anything that I felt like was close to this in terms of theme and flavor, but I have kind of separate little lists here. I have, movies that deal with sort of dark or evil or possibly evil children and related to religion. So of course, for me, that's like an unholy trifecta of Rosemary's Baby, The Omen, and The Exorcist. Like, if that's the kind of theme you want with like a possibly malicious child with like religious overtones there. I think
also strong motherhood in 2 out of those 3, for sure. Actually, probably all 3.
I think all of them.
Yeah.
All of them have strong mother roles. If you're looking for films with, characters venturing into strange lands, I think you could do a lot worse than Pan's Labyrinth, Alice in Wonderland, actually like more like the Tim Burton version, and The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
That's, way less dark, obviously, but there's some darkness. There's some darkness there.
For sure.
Hellraiser movies, for sure. If you want movies about hell, like that's, Hellraiser.
With beautiful imagery.
And then, from a literary kind of bent, in The Inferno and Paradise Lost are absolute must, they're all-time staples of literary explorations of hell.
Yeah. And I think a lot of what we know about hell in our culture comes from those books.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great
and
stuff.
Art too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you took like different approaches to that, because I have a completely different set of stuff. So the folks are going to get lots of good recommendations. So mine are exclusively like purgatory stories.
Okay.
So some of these might be a little spoilery, actually. So just, I don't know, like proceed at your own risk.
Beware.
Yeah, just beware. So the first one I'm going to recommend is Southbound. And it is a anthology movie. I'm not going to say too much about it, but it's also a good women in horror recommendation, because there's at least one segment directed by a woman. And I'm so sorry, I cannot remember who, but
me either.
You can look it up. And I won't go into detail. You'll just have to watch it and, You'll see why it's called Southbound. Another good one is Jacob's Ladder from 1990. I really want to cover Jacob's Ladder. I saw it for the first time last year and just fell in love with it. And I was like, oh, it's a sneaky religion and horror movie.
Sure is.
Yeah, it is. Another fun one, not horror, is In Bruges, which is a fantastic movie. And part of the reason why I recommended In Bruges is because there is a lot of references to Bosch. And Bosch is this painter who did these like beautiful, intricate hellscapes that I feel like Silent Hills definitely, some of those creatures were inspired by Bosch. Another one, not horror, What Dreams May Come, which is a Robin Williams movie from the late 90s.
Yeah, I remember that movie coming out. I never saw it. I was supposed to go on a date with somebody to see it, and then something happened and we didn't go on the date. So.
Well, we watched it in one of my art classes in high school, and it left an impression on me. So I revisited it a few days ago. Certain aspects do not hold up. Like the effects do not hold up. It's kind of cheesy, kind of a little over-saccharine, but the concepts are strong. It's a very interesting movie if you are at all interested in like ideas of the afterlife, because it takes a very sort of abstract view of the afterlife. So there's a lot of like beauty and imagination, but then it's at one point the main character has to go into hell, and it is very Renaissance painting, Paradise Lost, all that. So again, the effects don't 100% hold up, but like some of just the ideas are really unsettling. So it's kind of like a love story and a happy movie, but then there's just bizarre part in the middle where you're going into hell. It's an interesting movie. I
had no idea. I thought it was just strictly kind of like a saccharine, kind of like inspirational kind of thing. I had no idea that there was this like detour.
Yeah. I think that's part of the reason why I liked it, is because it is very saccharine at certain parts. And then it's like, this movie, I don't know who directed it or wrote it, but now I feel like I need to do some research on that, because I feel like this person and I vibe together. Other hellscape, purgatory type movies. I got two more. Event Horizon, which is a great space movie. Kind of has Hellraiser vibes. And then the last one is Triangle, which the less I say about that movie, the better. Just watch it.
When did Triangle come out? Because I'm wondering if I'm thinking of the right movie.
Like 2010s.
Okay. I think that's not the one I'm thinking.
Okay. Melissa George is in it.
I'm going to have to look. Oh, I know her.
2009. And it's about this woman. She goes sailing with her friends, and there's lots of time loops. And you're like, what is happening on this boat?
So maybe like Bermuda Triangle.
Yes.
Well, don't answer me. Okay.
Yeah,
that was just a guess. Okay.
It is Bermuda Triangle. That's not spoilery though. Like you figure that out. You figure that out pretty fast. But yeah, just an interesting. Anyway,
that's interesting.
Yes, I don't want to say any more about it.
Okay.
I know when I was making this list, I was like, am I going to spoil all these movies? I think I've been vague enough.
Yeah. Well, based on what you just said about the time loop thing, I mean, maybe you could even throw Groundhog Day on that list, and that would be appropriate to the time we're recording this. It's almost Groundhog Day. That's an all-time classic.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. If you want to go completely after the razor wire scene, if you need a palate cleanser, do Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, and you'll be fine, and you'll be ready to go to sleep.
Exactly. That's the movie I throw on.
Oh, well, Jacqueline, thanks again so much for coming on for another Women in Horror Month episode. Please remind the folks what your podcast is and where they can find you.
Oh, thanks, Nicole. You're the best. My podcast is A Cut Above. It's my friends John and Hyderberg and me, and the three of us talk about a different movie every week. You can find us on all the regular podcatchers, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. We're there. So A Cut Above Horror Review.
Yes, and I will be guesting. Let's see. This episode's coming out I believe this episode is coming out before I guest on your show. So hopefully, people, you need to keep an eye on A Cut Above and I will be there.
Yep. And yeah, you'll be coming on February 19th. So the episode will probably be out on the 20th or 21st.
Yep. This episode will definitely be out before then. So when you're done listening to this, go listen to my I Cut Above episode. And I also wanted to just like do a little shout out to some of our like podcasting sisters. Our friend Caitlin has Plug It Up. It's it's always female centric. So it's a great show. Ghoulish University, which is our friend Logan, who was on for the Conjuring episode. It's her podcast about Tales from the Crypt. It's like fun, campy, lots of chaos. Sometimes they have like 5 or 6 people on there, and it's just like, it's pure chaos. I love it. And then our friend Anna has Cinema Slab. And they do kind of a little bit of everything. They do review. Right now, they're doing a series about True Detective. And I'm having a blast listening to them talking about True Detective because we're all just trying to figure it out together. And I'm going to be on their show, let's see, on the 5th. So when this episode is out, you can go back and listen to the Cinema Slab series on True Detective, and I am on one of those episodes. I'm doing a few guest spots in February, which I love. I'm always happy to do guest spots, but I'm especially happy to do them during February.
It's a good month.
It is. It's a great month. So as always, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Light and Shadow Pod. Please rate and review the show wherever you listen. You can become a supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/Light and Shadow Pod. I'm going to keep next month's episode under wraps for the moment. I think I know what it's going to be, and I'm excited about it, but I don't want to let the cat out of the bag just yet. So until next time, remember to support women in horror and stay spooky.